I'm reading today from John 7:37 through 39, and 8 through 12. On the last day of the festival, the great day, Jesus was standing there and cried out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let anyone who believes in me drink. As the scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water." Now he said this about the Spirit, which believers were to receive. For as yet there is no Spirit, my word's cut off. For yet there is no Spirit. Oh, y'all do that again. Has not glorified. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever flows with me will never walk in darkness, and they will have the light of life." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Good morning, church. My name is Trey. I am the teaching pastor here at the church. And we are in the midst of our Lenten series, our Lenten season here. And this year, we are looking at the Gospel of John and looking at Jesus' I am statements. But we're looking at it through the idea of these embodied realities, embodied images and experiences, because we are not just brains. We are not even primarily brains. We are embodied people, right? And so last week, Kelly said that the aim of our time here in Lent is to have an embodied faith. Right? And she defined this as the awareness of being fully present in one's body while also engaging with and experiencing the presence of God. Wanting to be able to maintain a full presence in our body while also being aware of the presence of God, the experience of God. And this idea of being an embodied human has been under attack and in decline for quite some time. Western philosophy has rooted so much of our being in our head, right? Descartes has a statement, "I think, therefore I am," right? The essence of existing in that idea is thinking, right? It's not feeling. It's not being in your body. It's this idea of thinking. We have been the idea of what it means to be human has become so rooted in our head that there's an author named James K. Smith. He says that the prevailing idea is that we are brains on a stick, right? All of our existence goes on up here, and it doesn't connect with what's here. And this is a false understanding of what it means to be human. And even like this idea of "I think, therefore I am." Now, Descartes was not saying that we are not embodied people. However, the sort of results of what he did, what he was saying, resulted in this philosophy that really roots us in our brain. And it's an impossibility, right? When we think, like let's say I said for you to think about sitting in a chair, right? That is not simply a sort of esoteric, brainy activity, right? When you think about sitting in a chair, for one, all of our chairs are different, right? But you are creating an image in your mind based on embodied experience, right? If you're like me, I have some knee problems. When I think of sitting in a chair, I think about it's a little bit difficult, right? You know what I mean? I'm getting older. You got to think like there's some pain associated with that. There is no perception without experience, right? I found this great quote by Henry Bergson, who he's talking about this idea of how we think and how embodied it is. And he says this: "There is no perception that is not full of memories. With the immediate data of our senses, we mingle together thousands of details out of our past experience," right? The way we compute the world is not rooted always in the present. We are taking together thousands of past experiences, thousands of past understandings, and we are then interpreting what's going on around us, right? We experience through our bodies and through the past, right? So when we think about a chair, you're not just building a chair out of nowhere. You're building a chair and the idea of sitting based off your experience, based off your embodied past. And this is rooted in everything we think, and even our communication, right? When we talk about like being in love, right? We say butterflies in the stomach, right? This embodied understanding, and it carries more weight, it carries more meaning than just being like, I like her, right? It communicates something differently, right? Or my heart skipped a beat. Right? These are ways of communicating. You're not saying that your heart actually skipped a beat. It's this embodied way of communicating from one embodied being to another, right? And we can understand it because we all live and breathe and move and think through our bodies, right? Or I've lost my bearings, right? When you don't know where to go, it's this, we talk about it in this physical sense of being disoriented, which is interesting. And so this morning, we're going to focus in on this idea, which maybe you relate to, that sort of panic-inducing, chest-tightening feeling of being lost, of losing your bearings, right? When your stomach drops and you realize, I don't know where to go. Right? Many of us have experienced this physically. You know, maybe it was you were hiking and all of a sudden you realize I don't know at all which way I'm supposed to be going. Or on a road trip, for those of us who are old enough to not have phones that had GPS built in them, you have those printed directions. You take one wrong turn and figure it out. You know, you're lost forever after that. And so hopefully you brought your journal. We're focusing on journaling. So I want to take a few minutes now, and I want you to journal about a time that you were lost, right? That you were truly lost. And I want you to think not just about what happened, what was the experience, but what did it feel like? What was going on inside your body when you realized, I don't know where to go? If you don't have one of our journals, there's some out there, but you can also just grab your phone and write this out. So think about a time you were lost. What did it feel like? Oh, thank you. You can keep writing, but I'm going to kind of go on. My wife and I this weekend entered a new phase of our lives. Both our kids are now old enough to go on the youth retreat. So like for the first time in long we can remember, like they're both just off doing something and we're home alone. And as any parent, you know, you spend you're like, oh man, this is going to be great. They're going to be gone. We're going to have so much, you know, there's so much freedom. And what we ended up doing was organizing our house. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, there's not these little monsters making messes everywhere. So we picked up all the stuff that usually has been collecting on the bookshelf, you know, and we reorganized the kitchen. As we were doing that, as we were picking up stuff on the bookshelf, I came across this journal from some years ago. And this journal is from a time in which I was very lost, right? God and I had been on hiatus for a little bit. I was staring down the barrel of my mental health not being well. I was rapid cycling between manic and depressive very quickly. And I was staring down the barrel of going to a mental health hospital to be evaluated for a week, and B, the reality that I had to get sober. And so I was in this just dark place, didn't know what to do. Everything felt excruciating because of where my brain was. And so I saw this journal. It kind of stopped me in my tracks as I was reading through it, and I was looking at this person who did not see a way forward. right? This version of myself that could not for the life of him see a path to tomorrow even, much less further beyond that. And I was reminded of the sort of sickening feeling that comes with that, right? I don't know about you, but that experience for me was sort of a cold clamminess all over my body, this feeling of not at all knowing how to take the next step, and firmly believing that not only did I not have a direction, but that I was incapable of finding one, right? That that maybe that a light didn't exist anywhere. Maybe that a path didn't exist forward. When you're so lost in that sense, that embodied experience is something that's very human, right? It can happen physically, it can happen metaphorically. The people of Israel knew this embodied experience of lostness. Right? They knew what it meant like to not know the path forward. In the story of Exodus, when the people of Israel had been enslaved in Egypt and God comes and rescues them, right? We always really focus on that part. We're like, yeah, they crossed the Red Sea, everything's great, right? And we forget that at that point, they're a group of about 600,000 people standing on the other side of a sea that they've never been on before. Where do you go next? What happens from there, right? This is the Exodus story. My favorite theologian calls it the most famous immigration story, right? This is a group of people who have just left their home where everyone was born and their grandparents were born for generations, and now they're standing on the other side of the sea. They need a home. Where do you go, right? How do you know the path? And Exodus says this. They set out from Sukkoth and camped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness, on the edge of that place they don't know where. There's no path through. There's no roads to follow. The Lord went in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor a pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. The people entered the edge of this wilderness where there's no way through, there's no path to follow, there's no sense of what comes next. And God shows up in a pillar and guides them, shows them the way. This embodied experience of lostness, of wandering, of not knowing a path forward, and then God showing up and literally being a light to guide became a defining memory of the people of Israel. It's retold over and over in Deuteronomy when Moses the people are about to cross into that land that God was guiding them to, right? He begins that sort of sermon he gives by saying, but in spite of this, you have no trust in the Lord your God, who goes before you on the way to seek out a place for you to camp, in fire by night and in cloud by day, to show you the route you should take. Psalm 78 verse 12 says, in the sight of your ancestors, he worked marvels in the land of Egypt and in the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and let them pass through it and made the waters stand like a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud and all night long with a fiery light. Later on in the story of the Old Testament, as the people have been sent again into exile and they come back, and Nehemiah is overseeing this dedication of the temple again and this remembrance of what God has done. He says this in Nehemiah 12. Moreover, you led them by day with a pillar of cloud and by night with a pillar of fire to give them light on the way in which they should go, to show them the way. There is this core memory in the people of Israel that when you are lost, when you are aimless, when you don't know where to go, that does not mean you are without hope, right? They have this story, this memory, this way of understanding that says there is and there can be a light to guide. This memory was so core to the people that they had this festival called the Festival of Booths, where the Jewish people would yearly remember this sense of wandering, right? This sense of lostness. Each year they would act out this experience, right? They had these embodied practices to remember the feeling of wandering. In Jerusalem, they would put their bodies in the place of wandering. People will literally move out of their houses and build tents in the streets, in their yard, wherever they can, and they will spend the week camping outside of their house in these tents to remember that physical sense of wandering, of displacement, of being between where you were and where you are heading. Right? This has been a long-standing festival called the Festival of Booths, not booze. My wife is always like, it sounds like you're just saying it's a beer festival. No, it's Festival of Booths, Festival of Tabernacles, of tents, right? And so they would enact this, right? And this is why I love the Old Testament. I tolerate the New Testament, but I love the Old Testament because the Old Testament is such an embodied understanding of the world. The people are like, if we're going to think theologically about lostness and God being the way, you have to do that in your body. And so they would literally leave and go in a tent and sort of play act this idea of wandering again so that their whole self would be brought into this idea. And so for generations, they would do this and they would camp and they would replay this sense of wandering. And then on the last night of this festival, on the great day, they would light fires all over Jerusalem, right? On the corners of the walls of the temple in what's called the Court of Women, they'd put these big old bonfires on there. And it said that there was not a shadow in Jerusalem. There's this quote from Talmud Bavli that says, "One who did not see the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water never saw celebration in his day. There were so many oil lamps on poles in the temple courts that the whole city was lit up," right? You have to think about this in a time where there is not electricity. To be in a city at night and there be light everywhere would be a completely foreign experience, right? So you've been camping outside all night. You've been experiencing the darkness that comes when the sun goes down, this idea of not knowing where to go, of not having a direction. And then on the last night, there would be these huge fires lighting up this city to symbolize this idea that God has granted us a light, a direction to go, a place to move toward. He has shown us a path in the midst of our lostness. And this was not just an act of the Israelites looking back, right? This was not just a past celebration. This was a present practice, a hope for the now and the future, for a way to go, right? At times, this festival would have been bittersweet. Times where Israel was no longer free. Right? During the time of Jesus, Israel was under the largest empire. They were under the boot of the largest empire the world had ever known, the Roman Empire. They had been subjected again to a pagan empire. And so at this festival, it would have been impossible to not make a correlation between the Egypt they were escaping and wandering away from and the fact that they were now under the boot of an empire again. There would have been this question of when are we going to follow? When will there be a light out of this oppression again, right? So it was bittersweet. It was this idea of looking again for direction to go. When is God going to come and show us that light that will lead us out of oppression, out of this darkness, out of this aimlessness that we have under the empire? And it was on one of these festivals, it was during one of these festivals, it was on that great day that a man stood up and said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Jesus, during this time of remembering and embodying the experience of aimlessness, of wandering, and of celebration of when there is that light, Jesus stands up and says, if you are lost, if you are unable to find your way, if you need a pillar of fire to guide you, I am. When we ask the question, who is Jesus? We oftentimes give very heady answers. And one of the things we're trying to do during this series is to root those understandings of who Jesus is into our body, right? So when you ask, who is Jesus in the context of John 8, Jesus is the sense of relief we get when we see that light on the horizon, right? Jesus is the lighthouse, right? When you've been lost at sea amongst the storm and there's finally a hope that there's somewhere to go. Jesus is that sense of the release of anxiety when you're lost and you finally get one bar on your cell phone, right? You finally get that one bar. Jesus is the end of that dread all over your body, the release of the tightness in your chest. Jesus is the spark of hope when you might have stumbled across a path, that calmness that comes after being riddled with anxiety. Jesus is direction when we have been directionless. Jesus is a guide when we have been wandering. Jesus is the solace of having a place to aim for, having a direction. Jesus is the end of aimless wandering. And there are many senses in which this can be true, this feeling of lostness in our life. It can be like not knowing what to do with our life. Maybe a job has ended and you don't know what's next, or maybe even bigger, you've lost someone you love, or a tragedy has happened in your marriage, in your life, and you just literally don't know, what am I supposed to do next, right? But there are other forms of lostness, other forms of darkness that take away the light, right? There's the darkness of our own sin, of leading ourselves into the night, into the wilderness, without a light anywhere on the horizon, without an understanding of what to do next, of how to escape this hole we have dug ourselves into. There's the darkness of trauma, of our bodies and our minds feeling a sense of dread and aimlessness that isn't even connected to our present circumstances, but that we don't know how to get out of. We don't know how to guide even our inner selves toward the light. There are so many different ways. And what's fascinating to me about this story is, as Janita mentioned, the two scriptures we read, they take place at the same day. But they're separated in the text. And the story they're separated by is very interesting. Okay, so Jesus, the celebration of during the Feast of Booths, the last day celebrated God giving water from the rock and God in the pillar of fire, right? So it celebrates both of these things. And so at one point we have Jesus saying, I am the living water, right? And at the other one we have Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. And in between that is this story. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law of Moses, Moses commanded us to stone such woman. Now what do you say? They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, sir. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go on your way, and from now on, do not sin. Immediately after that, it says, Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Who is Jesus? Jesus is finding a path out of our own sin, a way out of our own destructive habits that hurt ourselves and others, that can feel so smothering and so impossible to escape from. Jesus is the opening of a way out when everyone surrounds us to tell us that we are terrible, that we are broken, that we don't deserve this or that. When the world gathers around and says, you are not, Jesus opens a way and says, you are. And I am. And I will guide you. I remember the time I was writing this journal, I had no sense of direction. It seemed impossible to move forward. There was no light on the horizon, no guide. I was broken up about my own brokenness, about what had happened to me in my past that I hadn't dealt with. All of it was sort of crushing me at the moment. And then one night I was sitting outside, and finally this wall broke, and I physically felt a sort of presence on me, and it felt like a weighted blanket. I'm a very fidgety person. I can't stop moving, right? And during this time, my wife looked out at me sitting in this lawn chair in this little garden area, and she noticed that I was still, that I wasn't constantly moving. Jesus had sort of put some weight on me to tell me I was safe, to calm me down. Jesus came and gave me a way where there was none. It wasn't, I was so afraid that door would open and I would be condemned and God would be like, where have you been? You've forsaken me, yada, yada. And all Jesus did was said, did no one condemn you? There's a way out. There is a light on the horizon in your storm, and I am that light. And sometimes we can get confused about who Jesus is. And we can think that Jesus is going to be the first person to pick up a stone and throw it at us. And that is not true. It doesn't matter what sort of darkness you are walking in. Jesus is here just like he was for the woman caught in adultery who had done something that damages not only herself but people around. This is real harm. But Jesus says, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm here to take you by the hand and guide you out. And if you're willing to look at that light, to follow the pillar of fire, I can show you the way. So this Lenten season, we are looking to Jesus to guide us. And we're asking the question, what darkness is confusing me? What darkness is making me aimless, directionless? And how can I find Jesus